Sultan Suleiman sat in his tent, the weight of an empire on his shoulders. Outside, the Janissaries whispered in anger, their loyalty torn between their Pasha and the man they believed should have been his heir. The execution chamber was silent now, save for the lingering echoes of a struggle that had already ended. Prince Mustafa, once the empire's brightest hope, was dead. Strangled by his father's order, his lifeless body was carried out, a prince who had commanded armies, who had won battles, now reduced to a cautionary tale of power, fear, and betrayal. The execution of Prince Mustafa remains one of the most shocking moments in Ottoman history. It wasn't just the death of a prince, it was the end of a dream, a turning point that reshaped the future of the empire. Mustafa was strong, popular, and seemingly destined for the throne. The Janissaries adored him, the people admired him, and even foreign envoys predicted he would be the next ruler. But in the shadows of the palace, whispers grew louder. Letters surfaced, rumors spread. Mustafa was plotting against his father. Whether those whispers were true or not, they led to his downfall. But was it really treason, or was it something more sinister? Many believe this was not just politics but the result of a carefully crafted scheme. Hurrem Sultan, the woman who had risen from a slave to the most powerful figure in the empire, had everything to gain from Mustafa's death. So did her son, Selim, the weak but favored prince. And what about Rustem Pasha, the Grand Vizier who stood to secure his position by eliminating a rival? Was Suleiman tricked into killing his own son, or did he see something in Mustafa that others didn't? This is the story of a father and a son caught in the deadly game of power. A tale of ambition, betrayal, and the fine line between loyalty and treason. What really happened that day in Konya? Was Mustafa truly guilty, or was he the victim of palace conspiracies? And in the end, did Suleiman make a decision to protect his empire, or did he destroy the very future he was trying to secure? From the moment he was born, Prince Mustafa carried the weight of destiny on his shoulders. As the eldest son of Sultan Suleiman, his path to the throne seemed certain. Unlike many royal heirs, Mustafa was not just a prince by birth but a leader in every sense. He was groomed for power, trained in statecraft, and sent to govern Manisa, a key province where future sultans learned the art of ruling. The people adored him, and the Janissaries, those elite warriors who decided the fate of empires, saw in him the qualities of a great ruler. His presence on the battlefield only strengthened their devotion. With victories to his name, Mustafa proved himself not just as a prince but as a warrior sultan in the making. But the very things that made him great also made him dangerous. His popularity was both his greatest strength and his greatest threat. As he grew in power, whispers in the palace grew louder. Some claimed he was too independent, too ambitious, and perhaps even too impatient for the throne. It wasn't uncommon for Ottoman princes to rebel against their fathers, history had seen it before. But Mustafa had shown no open disloyalty. He knew the rules of the game, and he played them well. He remained respectful to his father, yet his growing influence cast a shadow over those who had different ambitions for the empire. At the heart of this political storm stood Hurrem Sultan, the woman who had defied all odds to become the most powerful figure in the empire. A former concubine who rose to become Suleiman's legal wife, she had something no other woman in the harem had ever achieved, a son whose path to the throne was within reach. Selim, her son, was no match for Mustafa in strength, leadership, or experience. But Hurrem was not a woman who accepted defeat, and in the ruthless world of Ottoman politics, the battle for the throne was never just fought with swords, it was fought with whispers, alliances, and the careful manipulation of a ruler's mind. Mustafa, despite his intelligence, may have underestimated the dangers lurking within his own family. The more his influence grew, the more he became a target. Rustem Pasha, the Grand Vizier and Hurrem's ally, played a critical role in shaping Suleiman's fears. Letters, real or forged, spoke of Mustafa's alleged rebellion. Was he truly plotting against his father, or was he simply the victim of a masterfully woven conspiracy? Whatever the truth, the tide had turned against him. His fate was no longer in his hands. The palace was a battlefield long before swords were drawn. In the heart of the Ottoman Empire, where whispers carried more weight than armies, Hurrem Sultan and Rustem Pasha played a game of strategy that would change history. They both knew that Prince Mustafa was the biggest threat to their ambitions. As the eldest and most beloved son of Sultan Suleiman, Mustafa had the loyalty of the Janissaries and the admiration of the people. If he ascended to the throne, Hurrem's own sons, especially Selim, would be cast aside or worse, eliminated. And so, a plan was set into motion. Hurrem was not an ordinary sultana. She had risen from a mere concubine to the legal wife of Suleiman, a position no woman had held before. Her power was unmatched, but her influence had limits. She could not openly dictate the fate of the empire. That is where Rustem Pasha came in. As the Grand Vizier and her most trusted ally, he had the political cunning and access necessary to manipulate the Sultan's decisions. Together, they began planting the seeds of doubt in Suleiman's mind. Letters, some real, some possibly forged, spoke of Mustafa's supposed disloyalty. Reports whispered of his secret meetings, his growing army, and his alleged dreams of claiming the throne before his father's time was up. Rustem Pasha played his role perfectly. On one hand, he acted as the loyal servant, advising Suleiman with careful words of concern. On the other, he ensured that Mustafa's reputation was quietly dismantled. Rumors spread through the court and the barracks of the Janissaries, painting Mustafa as a prince who had already decided that his father's reign had lasted long enough. These whispers did not need to be true, they only needed to be heard. Suleiman was no fool. He had been a ruler for decades, had fought wars, crushed rebellions, and seen deceit at every level. But Mustafa was not just any prince. He was the son he had once adored, the heir he had prepared for the throne. To believe that his own flesh and blood was capable of betrayal must have been agonizing. Yet the evidence, whether fabricated or exaggerated, was overwhelming. Every great ruler understood one harsh reality: hesitation could mean death. Perhaps Suleiman wrestled with his conscience. Perhaps there were moments when he doubted the accusations. But Hurrem and Rustem knew one undeniable truth: fear is the greatest weapon. The Sultan had seen what happened to empires when sons turned against fathers. He had witnessed the chaos of succession struggles. And if Mustafa truly had ambitions beyond waiting for his rightful turn, then Suleiman had only one choice. The whispers had done their work. The decision was made. Suleiman the Magnificent was not just a father, he was an emperor, the ruler of one of the most powerful empires in the world. Every decision he made carried the weight of history, but none were as agonizing as the fate of his eldest son. Prince Mustafa had been his pride, his hope for the future, the heir who was once seen as the ideal ruler to continue the Ottoman legacy. And yet, the whispers of treason had reached him, creeping into his thoughts, poisoning his trust. Was this the natural course of empire, where love and power could not coexist? Or had he been manipulated into believing a lie? The accusations against Mustafa were not light. They suggested that the prince was gathering support among the Janissaries, that he was forming secret alliances, and that he might strike before his father's reign had truly ended. Some even spoke of letters exchanged with the Persian Shah, the empire's greatest enemy. If any of these claims were true, Suleiman's hesitation could cost him everything. He had seen before what happened when heirs became impatient. History was filled with fathers who ignored warning signs, only to be overthrown, imprisoned, or murdered by their own sons. If Mustafa had truly stepped onto that path, was there any room for mercy? Yet, there was another side to this story, one that gnawed at the edges of Suleiman's heart. Mustafa had never openly defied him. He was not an arrogant, reckless prince, but a skilled leader, a beloved commander who inspired loyalty in his troops. The Janissaries admired him, not because he sought to rebel, but because he was a warrior, much like his father had been in his youth. Could it be that his popularity had been mistaken for ambition? Could Hurrem Sultan and Rustem Pasha have fed him lies, twisting truth into something unrecognizable? Suleiman was trapped between duty and emotion. A ruler must think of the empire before anything else, yet a father must protect his child. If he was wrong, if Mustafa was innocent, then he would be condemning not just his son, but his own soul. But if he ignored the warnings, if he allowed Mustafa to live and rise unchecked, then the empire itself could be at risk. His love for his son clashed against the ruthless logic of kingship. The ultimate test came when Mustafa was summoned to his father's camp in Konya. Mustafa, confident in his innocence, walked straight into his father's tent, believing that this was just another meeting. But as he entered, he saw the guards waiting. The realization hit him too late. His father had made his choice. The executioners closed in. Suleiman, hidden behind a curtain, could not bear to watch, yet he did not stop it. Mustafa fought, as a warrior would, but it was futile. The empire had demanded his life, and the empire had won. In the days that followed, Suleiman remained silent, his grief hidden beneath the weight of his decision. Had he done what was necessary, or had he committed the gravest mistake of his reign? The empire was secure, but his heart was shattered. And as he looked upon the empty space where his son once stood, the question haunted him: had he killed a traitor, or had he been deceived into murdering his greatest heir? The cold silence of the imperial tent was shattered by the struggle of a prince fighting against fate. Prince Mustafa, the once revered heir to the Ottoman throne, found himself at the mercy of the empire he was meant to rule. The executioners, deaf to his protests, moved swiftly. He resisted, as any warrior would, but there was no escape. The order had come from the highest authority, the Sultan himself. As the noose tightened around Mustafa's neck, his cries were swallowed by the weight of history. A prince had fallen, but was it justice or betrayal? To some, this was a crime against justice, an unforgivable act fueled by deception and palace intrigue. Mustafa had been the people's prince, beloved by the Janissaries, admired by the court. His leadership in battle had earned him respect, and his lineage, being the son of Mahidevran Sultan, tied him to the empire's past glories. Those who had supported him did not see a traitor, they saw a victim. A victim of Hurrem Sultan's relentless ambition, of Rustem Pasha's political maneuvering, and of a father's misguided fear. The Janissaries, outraged, mourned him as a martyr, whispering that the empire had lost its rightful ruler to a carefully woven conspiracy. But for others, Mustafa's execution was not a crime, it was an inevitability. In the Ottoman Empire, where fratricide was often a grim necessity, a ruler could not afford hesitation. Power was fragile, and history had shown that rebellion often began with whispers of dissatisfaction. If there was even a sliver of truth to the accusations against Mustafa, then Suleiman had no choice. A son's betrayal, real or perceived, could bring down an empire. If Mustafa had gained too much influence, if the Janissaries were loyal to him above the Sultan, then his existence was a threat. Could Suleiman truly allow an alternative power center to exist within his own empire? The tragedy was in the uncertainty. Was Mustafa truly guilty, or had he been caught in a web of palace politics? Did Suleiman act out of necessity, or was he a pawn in a scheme he could not see? The echoes of that decision would haunt the empire for years to come. The people mourned, the Janissaries seethed with resentment, and the shadow of doubt lingered over Suleiman's reign. Mustafa's death was not just the end of a prince, it was the moment the empire lost its future. And as the executioners left the tent that day, carrying away the lifeless body of a son betrayed, the only question that remained was whether the empire had sealed its own fate along with him. The execution of Prince Mustafa sent shockwaves through the Ottoman Empire. A kingdom that once seemed unshakable now stood on uncertain ground. Among the Janissaries, who had long seen Mustafa as their future sultan, whispers of discontent turned into silent rebellion. Many refused to accept the loss of their favored prince, believing he had been the victim of a ruthless conspiracy rather than a genuine threat to the throne. Their sorrow simmered into resentment, and though they did not openly rebel, the trust between the military and the Sultan had been permanently fractured. In the imperial palace, the weight of Mustafa's death bore down on everyone, most of all, on Sultan Suleiman himself. The once magnificent ruler, who had commanded vast lands and built an empire with unparalleled strength, was now haunted by the decision that had taken his son's life. It was said that he regretted the execution deeply, realizing too late that Mustafa had been loyal. But remorse could not bring the prince back. The tension between fatherly love and the duty of a ruler had left Suleiman hollow. The empire continued, yet something had changed. An invisible crack had formed in the very foundation of the dynasty. Mahidevran Sultan, Mustafa's mother, was shattered beyond repair. Once a favored consort, she now had no place in the palace. With no son to protect her, she was sent into exile in Bursa, where she would spend her remaining years mourning the boy who had been taken from her. Meanwhile, Hurrem Sultan, long suspected of orchestrating Mustafa's downfall, now stood alongside Rustem Pasha as one of the most powerful figures in the empire. But even she was not untouched by the storm she had helped create. The people murmured about her role in Mustafa's demise, and her reputation as a cunning manipulator grew darker. If she had hoped to secure the future for her own sons, the cost had been immense. The empire, too, suffered in ways not immediately visible. Mustafa had been a capable leader, a warrior who commanded the loyalty of the army. His absence left a void that could not be easily filled. The unity of the empire had been shaken, and future conflicts within the dynasty would only grow more dangerous. Suleiman's later years saw increasing instability, with the rivalry between his surviving sons, Selim and Bayezid, leading to further bloodshed. Had Mustafa lived, he might have ensured a smooth transition of power. Instead, the empire inched closer to the internal struggles that would eventually weaken its strength. The execution of Prince Mustafa was not just the loss of a son or a prince, it was the loss of a future that could have been. The question that lingered in every corner of the empire was whether Mustafa had truly been guilty, or whether the Ottoman Empire had doomed itself by silencing him. The execution of Prince Mustafa remains one of the most haunting tragedies of the Ottoman Empire. It was not just the death of a son but the unraveling of trust, the erosion of stability, and a moment that cast a long shadow over the reign of Sultan Suleiman the Magnificent. To this day, historians and scholars debate whether Mustafa was truly a threat or merely a victim of palace intrigue, caught in a game of power where even loyalty was not enough to save him. For some, it was clear that Hurrem Sultan and Rustem Pasha had orchestrated his downfall, ensuring that the path to the throne was cleared for Hurrem's own sons. The letters, the whispers in the palace, the carefully planted doubts, all seemed to point toward a masterfully executed scheme. But even if they had manipulated events, Mustafa's fate ultimately lay in the hands of his father. Sultan Suleiman, the great ruler who had conquered lands and shaped an empire, had faltered when it came to his own son. Whether driven by paranoia, duty, or divine justice, he made a decision that he would never be able to undo. Yet, for others, the reality was more complex. The Ottoman Empire had seen countless rebellions, and the mere suspicion of disloyalty was enough to warrant death. Perhaps Suleiman genuinely feared that Mustafa would overthrow him, much like other sons had done to their fathers in the past. Perhaps the execution was not just about power but about survival, the harsh reality of ruling an empire where even family ties could not override the demands of sovereignty. But whatever the justification, the consequences were undeniable. Mustafa had been loved by the Janissaries, respected by the people, and viewed as a capable successor. His loss did not just devastate his mother, Mahidevran, but also left a vacuum in the empire. What followed was a succession battle between his surviving brothers, Selim and Bayezid, plunging the empire into further bloodshed. Had Mustafa lived, would he have been the great ruler that the Ottomans needed? Or would he, too, have fallen to the brutal cycle of ambition and betrayal? In the end, the story of Prince Mustafa is one of power, fear, and fate, a reminder that in the corridors of history, even the greatest rulers are not immune to doubt, and even the most beloved heirs are not safe from destiny's cruel hand.